Hey everybody, welcome back to the Quest for the Bestest. It's the podcast from Backlot Banter where we review every single Palme d'Or winner, and today we are taking a look at a film from Turkey, 1982, the same year as a film from last week. This is called Yol, or The Road in English, A.K.A. The Road. We'll probably use the English title for the rest of the review, but a very interesting film, and one that I just watched today, but I am excited to discuss, as pretty much always. I think that we are going to have something interesting to say about it, because this is from way out of left field, is all I'll waffle about here before we actually get into our thoughts. Last week, to remind you quickly about what we talked about, was Missing, 1982, also an American movie about Chile, about a coup. We thought it was actually pretty dang good. It got an 8.2, but it went to the bottom of the 8.2 stack, the four-way tie that is that. To put it at spot number 8, it is below Rome Open City and above Barton Fink. So there you have it. I encourage you to go watch that video to find out more about a kind of unknown American film that really sparked our interest. So now I hand it off to Abram, who has letters from us, as they hand out at the beginning of this movie. Did any corresponders give us something to think about, something to chew on?
Yes, actually, our beloved son, John Tour 11, is back on the Missing episode, in fact, saying, in my teens in the mid-90s, I was lucky to have a friend whose father owned a video store. This meant that me and my friends had free access to movies, and we watched them all, including a lot of bad 70s and 80s movies. Missing, however, was one of those gems that was surprisingly good. I don't really remember much of it now, but I really liked it, and Jack Lemmon and Sissy Spacek were amazing. It's great to see Lemmon move on to more dramatic roles in his later years. Save the Tiger, The China Syndrome, to name a few. Now, I just want to zero in on this idea of having access to the whole video store.
Yeah.
Because I just think that's pretty cool.
Yes. That's like the warm,
I can tell you a
fuzzy,
website that'll do just about
nostalgic
that.
version of the past that we just wish we could have, right? You just wish you could always have something to plop into the VCR or the DVD player or what have you.
As we've, as people who fare the seven seas have recently learned, that kind of stuff, as wide open and free ranging as it may seem, can be gone at the snap of a finger. Okay,
it can be.
No, you know what isn't gone at the snap of a finger? Something you can hold. Sit right there in your hand.
Having to hold.
Something that you are forced to rewind after you watch it.
Exactly.
I had a movie rental place. It's called Movie Gallery. And I used to love going to Movie Gallery, but then they closed when I was like 7. And now it's like a veterinarian clinic, which I would say is much more important, however, less useful to me personally. So
depends on what you define as important.
Yeah.
You know what I define as important? Whatever happens in this movie, which Tanner is going to describe for us right now.
Sure. Okay, Timo. Well, The Road is a film set in 1980s Turkey. And it opens, as you kind of mentioned, with a bunch of men getting some letters. We come to learn that these men are getting letters because they are in like a somewhat of a prison. It's an open air prison, effectively.
Free range prison.
Free range. They draw a differentiation between prison and penitentiary. This seems to be a little bit more free, having a little bit more freedom than a penitentiary specifically, because the inciting incident of this film is effectively these group of 5 men, some of whom get more screen time than others, effectively get put on leave. They can go out into Turkey, revisit their friends and family, their villages, their hometowns, whatever, and then under the accord that they come back. Some of them plan to do that, some of them do not.
I think it's a week that they have.
A week.
Yeah.
And so we have a collection of characters. The most important two are Said and Mehmet. And they have their own sort of strife with their families. Said is his wife has been sort of imprisoned for being a prostitute in his home village, and then Mehmet is going to see his family, his wife and children, for the first time after being put in prison on a botched heist with his brother-in-law. Mm-hmm. So that is sort of the setup, and then there's some people who are looking to escape as well. Like I said, they kind of get less screen time. There's a man who goes to the Turkish and Syrian border to try and make his way across. We'll talk about it, if that panned out or not. And yeah, I mean, that's effectively the plot of the film. Some of them die, they all face great tragedy in some fashion or another. So, yeah, a feel-good movie.
Yeah.
It is not.
it is incredible how much smoother this intro goes when we have a hard out for the recording session.
Yeah.
Whatever. What did you guys think of it? Who wants to go first?
Timo wants to go first.
Okay.
Oh,
He does.
I
Look at
kind
his
of,
eyes.
you can tell. I kind of like this film. I found it puzzling. I found myself really lacking any of the context that I felt I needed to understand some of the situations that I'm more interested. Right, I'm inclined, as you well know, to the social and the political situations of films and the interplay of characters within that. And by God, I just don't know anything about Turkey in the '80s, and so I am watching this and like sipping this slice of life in this very unique kind of situation that, I mean, you'd never even think of that, of a prisoner going on leave in the States. So we have a unique narrative place here, but other than finding many, many interesting vignettes and some very, I think, weighty themes, especially about gender relations, is where I think this film really comes down to. Um, it's kind of floating around and confusing to me just because I'm uneducated about the setting
Yeah.
and the culture and why things have to be how they are. The film is not interested in explaining because it's not necessarily aimed at me. And so
No.
that's kind of where my conflict is with the film, but I just loved being in this world and seeing this it's very foreign, it's very like melting pot of European influences and Middle Eastern, and it's all just in a place that I've never really attempted to view from specifically through like a cinematic lens. So I found it enjoyable for that.
Yeah. I mean, this is the kind of film that I'm totally unfamiliar with going in, and I'm only mildly more familiar with coming out. That makes it really exciting to be doing this project in specific. I think that it makes it more difficult for us to do the deep, critical, analytical, political, thematic
That we so
analysis
love
that we
to
usually do. Yeah, and we're certainly going to try our best here, but I have to admit, as a critic, in a long form conversation here at the beginning, that I don't know how much I can really offer about this film thematically, politically, socially, which is largely the context we end up reviewing a lot of our films through, because of what you said. It is literally foreign to us in time period, in culture, in location. But what is there on a filmmaking level, what is there on a moment-to-moment narrative level within any given sequence, I found to be very, very engaging. But without any context, it was pretty hard to get my footing. And then also, this film is structured in a very off-balance way. It's very like stirred up and like chopped up, and it made it hard for me to, frankly, tell who was who or which storylines were happening at which amount of time and which one had I not seen in a long time. And we're jumping around between locations that so much and people so much that I was confused for a lot of this film. But it is a film that I can tell is very quality in what it does. But as a person out of the time, out of the culture, out of the place, and as a first time viewer, it was a very difficult watch. Not necessarily because I found the thematic so like heart wrenching that I couldn't watch it. Like I need to look away, but because it's a rich film, and it's very hard to understand a rich film if you have no basis for it. So it was interesting as a critic to watch something that I felt like I was working very I was working very hard to understand and analyze it.
You want to go or you want me to go?
I'll go. Okay. I think that 1982 was a real heater at the Palme d'Or.
Ooh, yeah.
I really like this movie a lot. I think what's interesting about it is obviously, well, I'll step back for a second. I read a lot about the movie and this moment in Turkish history today.
Okay.
After
you'd seen the film.
After seeing the film. Yeah. So I was sort of filling pieces back in. I think what's interesting is watching this film without that context that I learned today. I still think it's very effective because ultimately the broad strokes ideas I think are evident in that this is a militant state and these are prisoners who have to navigate leaving prison into an equally authoritarian country, free
culture.
Country. And so I think that on that level, I had enough of a situation to grasp the feeling of the film.
Absolutely.
And I think that the mood of the road is what's most effective about it on a just visceral gut level. In reading about it and learning about this film that came out in 1982, being about a coup that happened in 1980, I think makes some of the pieces fit into place a little bit. I think, Timo, your point about it being uninterested in sort of getting anybody up to speed is simply due to the fact that it was about an event that was unfolding in the moment. We talked about some of the World War II films we covered being contemporaneous. I mean, this is contemporaneous, right?
And only removed from that exact moment in time because, as I was reading about, not to make it a competition.
That's not a competition.
The director was much like the characters in this film, put in prison for making this film, and can only finish it and distribute it through Switzerland into the Cannes Film Festival after he had escaped.
Yes. So I think that when you
broken out of prison escape, that's
pretty
sick
incredible.
as hell, actually.
When you start to piece together this larger narrative, and you start to, and I'm not sure if you read about this stuff, but we'll talk about it, the ways in which the film was censored and recut many times into the modern era sort of speaks to a general prescience, from what I've come to understand about this film to this day. And so I really enjoyed that visceral viewing, and I really enjoyed the opportunity to learn more about Turkish history as a result of trying to fill in those holes for me.
I guess I'll start, before I get into my thoughts, since I largely agree with a lot of things that people have said so far. I'll ask Timo, what version of this film did you watch? And by that, I mean, what was the runtime of it?
It was an hour and 49 minutes total, and it ended at about an hour and 46 minutes into the film. So
sure, it sounds like we all watched the same version.
A DVD version, apparently.
That DVD version, as I understand, is the version that was shown at the Cannes Film Festival in 2017.
But not the version that won the Cannes?
No, it was not. The version that won is the full 2 hours that's listed on Letterboxd.
And it is, and the version we watched is a censored version of the film.
Interesting.
So through the Cannes Film Festival, they sort of to be shown at the Turkish sort of showcase at the Cannes Film Festival after it had won, decades before. It was censored to take out some things about Kurdish politics, which obviously this film is very engaged in, and I think just generally
actual content in this film. I've really the besides going to Kurdistan, the film is not explicitly about, or it doesn't tell you how much Kurds and Kurdish identity is actually playing in it. It's
I think some sequences to that effect were cut out.
Yeah.
What I'll add, and again, I have an elementary understanding of this.
Here we go.
However, the original film, uncensored, was explicit and almost metatextual in referencing Kurdistan and its people as an independent state when it was not recognized as such by Turkey at the time of its release, which was a core reason why this was such an incendiary film in the eyes of the Turkish government. So it's important to note that our thoughts are on a version that, when reviewed, was considered to be by people who had seen both to be a worse version of the film.
Yes, I mean there was
by an external hand
when it was recut and shown subsequently at the Cannes Film Festival that it was not to Sırf Gören's directorial vision. So that is the context we're coming at this film with. We saw I believe much wider, much more widely distributed, sort of cut down censored version. So with that being said, I still really liked this movie. I think that yes, it sort of throws at you this story that's like, all right, we have these 5 prisoners, and I'm like, okay, with how we're pacing ourselves and how we're editing this right now, I feel like I'm going to be a little lost and we're going to be a little unmoored. But I think very smartly, the film recognizes where its key and important aspects are, and we really zero in on, as I sort of said in the summary, the stories of Mehmet and Said. And so I think those are 2 extremely strong narratives to follow, and are so sort of enriched with just human themes, and they have the context, of course, of this authoritarian, very staunchly religious nation and society. But I think a lot of what Goran is doing here is trying to parse by that and really drill to the heart of the conflict within these men, trying to I think ultimately this is a film about love, and love transcending, or attempting to transcend, more likely, political ramifications of the time, social ramifications, religious ramifications of the time, and how sometimes those structures can be too great, and sometimes you can lose the person you love to those structures and are really powerless and are thus imprisoned again. I think the setting of these guys as prisoners who must eventually return to their prison is sort of a metaphor for the authoritarian government of Turkey at the time.
Yeah, it's that cultural disconnect that we have from it, but that is presented, as far as we know, very accurately to the time and culture in this film that makes it so interesting to watch. I recently took a trip to Italy, and while I was there, it was the first time I'd ever been outside of the United States. It was the small things about Italian culture that I couldn't know just from watching average movies or more stereotypical movies that engaged me so much. And I got the same feeling out of watching this film because there were so many elements of just day-to-day interactive culture, traveling culture, political culture, the checkpoints, things like that, I felt like I was really deeply analyzing each scene because there were just little elements that I found that were literally foreign to me, being from another culture in another country, but that I was always attempting to understand the context because I'm like, okay, I'm not Turkish. I'm not in the 1980s. Why is this happening? In my mind, I'm like, is this still true today? How is that different from what's going on? And it is that setup of the concept of leave from a prison. That is something I'd never heard of before, but that creates a very unique tension, sort of outside the rest of the film, because frankly, the film largely doesn't concern itself with the fact that they need to get back. It is about their journey, like to their families, to their wives, mostly. But that extra layer of context of this is all happening within a week, I think gives a really unique mindset of, oh wow, like these guys are all experiencing so much, and this is all happening what, 4 days, 5 days, and then just the general like sort of external pressure that adds of, yeah, they're doing this, yeah, they're trying to make strides to see their family, to accomplish things, but this is all like, it's all compacted, and they will soon be ripped away from all of this, and if they return, be thrown back into the prison system. And so all of that was just like super fascinating for me to even within the scenes, which I think are all well constructed and most of them have unique premises and are have a lot of tension. There's even a larger layer to that is like, okay, interesting cultural thing and this element of like ticking time bomb of going back to prison. It's all this really interesting mixture.
Well, it's an interesting point you make, Tucker, about the way the film is paced.
Yeah.
Because the week feels like it goes on forever.
Absolutely.
And that's partially just a function of the fact we're following disparate storylines unfolding simultaneously, which makes the time elapse in an interesting way. But also your point about just cultural observation. We spend a lot of time on trains, in restaurants,
buses,
interpersonal interactions around a dinner table or various things. And I think you're right. It adds this very particular texture that I think as foreigners is interesting to see.
Yeah.
Particularly when you situate it within this larger context. And the 30-second version, what I read is essentially this coup in 1980 was the third of three coup in a 20-year period. So it was a very volatile period in Turkish history. It was, from what I understand, a largely bloodless coup in the moment. But then there was quickly a string of executions, and then on a larger level, which I think plays into the ambiguous face of some of our characters, a lot of arrests, disappearances, and people
like
who simply...
Yes. Well, and I'm sure that the United States had nothing to do with any of the coups that occurred in Turkey from 1960 to 1980.
I don't know. Who can say?
Turkey was not situated in a geopolitically important place on the
certainly
world
not. Certainly not.
Major conflicts of the land. Well, I mean, some things that Tanner, you mentioned the love of this film. Abram, you mentioned the trains. I think that there are many things that really are grabbing to me. I'll start with the trains.
Mm-hmm. Loving and trains. Let's put those together.
The travelogue aspect of this film, where it is just kind of like we are going and it's a challenge in and of itself to get where these characters want to go.
Yeah.
And the one that we lose very early on in the film, when he loses his papers and they cart him off and he's thrown in jail, and we never see him again. And
in my mind, I was calling him short guy.
Short guy. And so just this kind of rich texture of travel is something that I really enjoyed to watch. But as Tanner mentioned earlier, I do think that the core of the film comes into the relationships that our men have with the women that have been either left behind or have been forced behind. And the couple that really show up, I think, are just like wondrously complex, very heartbreaking character narratives between well, let's see if I can do the names right here. We've got
Sayid and Zine, and Mehmet and Amin.
The one that I kind of found myself being drawn towards was Mehmet's, where he goes through this very intense emotional journey of recognizing his own guilt in this crime, or at least the way that this family accepting it so that his wife would love him back, but creating enemies of her family. And I really enjoyed it and thought it was powerful and weighty and just like very, very lifelike. This film feels so documentary-esque, so lifelike. There are moments where I'm like, yeah, this is a fiction movie where, like, you know, constructing scenes and these characters are written, but like our extras are given kind of side eyes to the camera, and there's like bits around the edge that are very, very real and very just natural and honestly documentary-like.
Yeah. I do want to quickly ask a question about this film that I think will go into the major criticism that I have of this film. And I put that in air quotes, but it's me not understanding. Is Mehmet's story, where he reunites with his wife and children after the botched heist in which her brother died, and the family doesn't like him for it. And then there's a scene at the house where he gets slapped and one of the kids of the family tries to stab him with a knife. Is that the same guy who then later down the line is caught on the train with his wife and then gets killed? Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So I wanted to ask that to make sure I was following along with how each of these plot lines sort of ended up, because I will say that the criticism I had of this film is because we were jumping around so much and every character is always changing locations. I almost couldn't tell which storyline I was following at any given point. They move in and out of each other's narratives. They separate, and like sometimes we don't even see them separate, and then they just show up in another location because this film has so much land to cover, which is obviously one of the elements that makes it so texturally unique. But I was watching that scene with the guy and his wife on the train getting caught trying to have sex, and then getting killed, and like the mob coming out. I'm like, this is a really interesting scene. I don't remember which guy this is, and I don't remember which wife, and I don't remember so any of these scenes. I'm like, okay, there's some of them that are very isolated, so it's understandable. But I'm like, is this the one with the guy he went to the prostitute house and was trying to marry this younger woman? Like, is that guy? Like, this movie moves on constantly, and scenes just end, and we teleport somewhere else, and it's a different character in a different time in a different location. And sometimes it's very difficult for me as a first-time viewer seeing these actors I've never seen before, that to tell like which storyline is continuing right now, because we'll just drop things for like 30 minutes, maybe I'm not sure what's going on. But that is like my biggest issue with this film, is that I was just simply not able to understand, because there's so much happening and so many people in so many locations and things I was not familiar with as a foreigner, as someone who'd never seen work from this director and never seen any of these actors before. I was interested by the scenes. I'm like, I don't remember who's who.
Well, I want to start on go for it, Timo.
My quick counterpoint is that I was feeling that in this movie, and I was like, I'm just going to do a little homework right now in the middle of the film and just remind myself of everything. And
sure. Oh, I was thinking of reading the Wikipedia article or something. Like, okay, I want to make sure I know what's happening, but I didn't. I want to pay attention to the film.
There was just kind of like a slower scene, like a travel montage, and I was just like, okay, so like this guy's this guy, and this happened to him, and he went to he found the process. I was like, I don't normally do that to films, but this one did call out to me needing me to be a bit more intellectual and paying.
I'm glad I wasn't alone in that.
but I overcame, and it was fine for me. So
Yeah.
Yes, you're very brave and courageous, much like the characters in this film. I want to talk about Mehmet's storyline.
Yeah.
Since we sort of got started on him. So we've gone over it a couple times, but I think it really gets you started, and Goren really knows how to inject every so often just a super powerful, emotionally impactful scene for our characters. I think they mostly belong to Mehmet and Saeed. And I want to start with Mehmet, and I think the first one for him, I mean, he's the one who opens the film with, the reading of this letter that is, his wife asking him, like, hey, were you the reason that my brother Amir died? Like, just be honest with me. And he's away, he's hundreds of miles away, he can't, sort of speak with her, and he's also holding this guilt within himself. I believe it's the first one that really stuck out to me for a great scene with him is when I believe, is talking to his father, his sort of bedridden father. And it was sort of the first outside of prison person that he interacts with, where he recounts the story to him, and we get to see it in flashback a little bit. And he initially lies to his father again. He's like,
is it his father or is it his friend? I think he says he.
Okay. It's not his father, yeah.
Okay, is it not? Okay,
I thought he was an older man, so I was making a logic leap there, but. So he's recounting the story, and we see it sort of transpire in both ways, both in how he is initially describing it and then how it actually happened. And then when he sort of is honest with his friend about how it really went down, I think the performance of our actor here, hang on, let me pull up his name. The actor for Mehmet is Halil Ergun. Just shifts entirely, because he is a lot of these guys have these strong emotional walls put up, as you imagine a staunchly religious man in 1980s Turkey would.
In prison.
Who is in
prison.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then there's the moments in which it breaks down are just so rewarding as an audience member, whether that be early on or later on the train when he delivers a super powerful line that is for you it is shameful, for me it is a necessity. In terms of physically Good being moment. With his wife.
I mean, even earlier in Mehmet's story when he's talking with Saeed on the train, right, and he says the name of that city, I can't remember the name, it starts with a D, and he's like, oh, this is like coming to this place where these people know me and they will be happy to see me, and he lists out my wife, my brother-in-law, my mother and father-in-law, and because of what we've just been told a couple scenes earlier, we know that these people are going to hate to see him. They are not going to be happy to see him at all. But this like whole wrapped up feeling of coming home and his totally transform outlook on what he's going to do and what he's going to say, and he's going to go ask for forgiveness for this crime that he's committed and already being punished for. That is like a perfect stepping stone. You start with the scene with the friend, and then you have that scene where he displays this very like emotional want and openness, but he's lying about it. He's hopeful. And then in the next scene where it's all crushed when he's there, and he asks for forgiveness, and they curse him and they chase him out, and they're like, we're gonna come kill you. And even his wife doesn't come with him until later on in the movie, and we see it happen kind of off screen. Well, we don't even see them meet up. They just boom, they're together, and you find out why. It's emotionally very powerful. I think like their love is super transcendent beyond the pressures of society, kind of in an opposite way about Saeed's love. Saeed's love is so much more complicated and so much more forced into its being by the society and by the pressures around him.
Yeah. Or Abram, that's your name. Any thoughts?
Hey, Tim.
Yeah, there's just a couple things you guys have me thinking of. This idea of coming home, but coming home to what? Obviously, this is a very political movie. So if we were to extrapolate that up a level from a character level, this idea of coming home to what kind of Turkey have I come home to? And how is it fundamentally different from the one I knew before? I think that's an interesting idea.
That one, I think, plays very heavily with in Kurdistan when we have these sequences on the border. I think that one is very just like, it's so kind of light on plot to me. Like there's not, I didn't really get that he was trying to cross. I got that this was like his home that he came back to and this was his place, and it's just been very different. And there's a stupid line that they don't really understand why there's the fence there between Syria and Turkey, and they see each other right across the fences, the same people, and the landscape's the same, and yet every night they wait to hear the people getting shot.
Mm-hmm.
And so what's coming? What are you coming home to? Like you were saying.
And when they're at the border, there's an interesting line to the effect of like we're 10 steps away, but you can't cross those 10 steps. And on like a meta level, I think that's what this film did in its initial cut of its very pro-Kurd messaging that is simply absent from the version we watched. But I was also thinking, you said this a while ago, Timo, but this idea of the film feeling very documentarian, I think is appropriate. But I also think on the flip side, there's some just really beautifully constructed filmic moments and filmic images. I think the imagery of this film is stunning. What do you call him? Short guy.
Yeah. I think that one. He is Mevlut.
Okay. When he is in prison and he's looking out the window after he's been in prison because he's lost his papers, there's just it's not a deep metaphorical image, but the image of all the doves on the wire, and they all fly away except for one, and then that's the last time we ever see of him. I thought that was just really haunting. But the other image, and we can maybe use this as a way to get into Said's storyline.
I would love that.
The images of him and his wife and his son in the snow. The pass back as they're making that journey, and this idea of not wanting to have the beasts feed on her, and the image of the horse carcass and her looking at that, and these shots of her lagging 20, 30 feet behind the others. I think that whole sequence is just impossible to look away from. It's in some ways heavy-handed in its in the ways that it replays old dialogue, but I think it's appropriate in a sequence that is otherwise so poetic and so visual. I think that part of why the last thing to tie a bow on from your earlier conversation is that I was also confused at certain points, but frankly, I'm confused by most movies, and I usually just
how they fit all these people in this tiny box.
How I usually watch films, to be honest, is I'm like, okay, I don't understand what's going on here. I'm just going to enjoy what I'm looking at, and then I'll like stitch that back up later.
Sure.
But I think the reason I gravitate toward visual-led films, I think that this is a visuals-led film for as rich as the writing and the thematics are, is that I think you can just look at that sequence in the snow.
Yeah.
You can look at it out of context even.
And you just
I
know
think that it's
have an emotional reaction.
It communicates so much information in how sparse it is, how wide that photography is. I think that that's an incredible sequence.
If we don't mind, I'd like to sort of prime the conversation on Said's storyline here.
Because I started at the end. That's kind of my take. It was a faux pas.
I
I'll watch the movie.
What it really what his storyline evolves into is extremely moving to me. Like I was once I was sort of like aware of where we were going and what Goran was doing with the storyline, I was super in, and I thought this is something really special that I'm watching unfold right now. And a lot of the third act of the movie belongs to him in this journey through the this snowy, wintry pass.
Yeah, but also the village before he leaves.
Where he is with his wife's brother initially. He's the one that he's the one that's sort of saying, he's the one that like fixes up his tooth and everything, and then says, hey, this other woman from the village and her children died in this pass. And that sort of phrase, that bit of dialogue is replayed. And forgive me if it just took me a while to like tune into this fact, but I think the first time it replays is essential, at least for me, because it's when he is looking back at her sort of in this, just like in a shawl and otherwise just some regular clothes, not like bundled up like he and his son are.
His son is dressed like Drake in that one music video with the wide shoulders.
Yes.
The Roblox thing.
But anyway.
This Kanye is not important.
Yeah. They're all I don't know.
He sort of looks back and that moment of dialogue is replayed, and that's where it clicked for me that like he is looking for a extremely tragic but third way out, essentially. can basically confronted with this choice. It's like, well, your wife is locked up in her father's basement because she was sleeping around with some different townsfolk. That is what we are told. We're not sure to what extent that is the case. They call her a prostitute, but I think that might be exaggerating a little bit for religious effect.
But one of the details tag on there is that she was doing this out of necessity.
Yes,
as she says,
because it had been years since her husband had been.
Well, they were hungry.
They were. She was like, I'm watching myself
prostitution
thinner and thinner and stuff like that. So he is confronted with this choice. That's like, either you can do nothing and we will kill her, or you can stick to the sort of stringent religious rules and you take her back to your home village or her home village or whatever and stone her to death.
Yeah.
Like that is what basically your two choices. She dies either way. And he opts on this choice to give her effectively a death, a less brutal death by freezing to death. And once that clicked for me, with that moment of replay dialogue, I was like, it was almost like a transcendent film watching moment of like how emotionally wrought Saeed's whole journey has been up to this point. Those interactions with her father, where he's telling him, sort of questioning what he's going to do, asking if there's something on his mind, reminding him to not be sort of swayed because she has the devil in her and all these things. Like those moments all
let
become
your hand be steady. They say multiple times.
Those moments become immediately more rich with that context and that illumination as to what his mindset is, as to what his plan is. And even like when his son tells him that she's calling his name, you can kind of feel like his initial plan was to just leave her there and walk away and sort of like try and shut himself off from it, not be with her in her final moments. And then he caves in and he is there with her and he holds her in his arms and eventually tries to like, this is like the bittersweet or dark element of it, is that he tries to like keep her awake by beating her with his hands, with his belt, whatever. Like, he is still inflicting that physical violence on her that he regretted, but to try and save her instead.
The way that mirrors the way he beats the horse to keep it moving, that sequence is like total planting and then payoff when you have him beating the horse into its own death, and then
Schrodinger's beating the dead horse.
Yeah, I mean...
No, not Schrodinger. What's the gun? Chekhov's
beating the dead horse is like...
Yeah.
The moment it clicked for me, his whole plan was when we get to the horse carcass, and it's like, I was like, oh shit. But it was like, that idea was brewing previously. I thought, yes, a transcendent film moment where everything just clicks into place and it makes the previous 15 minutes of the film intensely far more emotional. And so that I appreciated that parallel, especially with the belt. Like and he has his kid do it too, and the kid is similarly indoctrinated, so to speak, about how what kind of punishment or consequences this situation calls for, and it's really, really difficult to watch, honestly.
I think this is also when you have to look at this in an allegorical lens. The father raising the son to enact this sort of now cyclical violence against the mother. I think you can, when you view that through the lens of a country on its third coup in 2 decades, this sort of intergenerational forced trauma by circumstance, and what that does to the son then, and then what the son grows up, and the life he has to live without his mother and his father in prison. Again, my reading is loose because I've only begun to now learn about this moment in Turkish history, but I think you have to draw the thread in that way too.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, and I think that moment in particular is the filmic and emotional highlight of the film, in terms of, I think the single strongest image of this film is him dragging his wife face first through the snow as their son is whipping her. And there's like a fallen over kind of tree thing in the background. Like the snow is like their dark clothing contrasts against the snow. I think that's one of the strongest images I've seen for this entire, Palme d'Or project. And it is a really interesting culmination that I think ties together all of the themes of this movie, from the cyclical violence to the way that he has been emotionally shielding himself from love, and then the way that the religious culture of the time puts them in this situation, I think it's all fantastic.
Yep.
I think that's the best moment of the film by a pretty solid margin.
Yep.
And not that the other parts are bad. It's just like that's just a massive step up.
Yeah, transcendent is the kind of the word that I use, and then Timo used it. I think it's accurate.
It was transcendent. I'll use it too.
Okay, fine. You know
I would also agree that it was transcendent.
Oh well, all right. Well, I'm glad we're
4
4 for 4 here. Call us Wendy's. Anyway, because we're 4 for 4. Anyway.
That's a really good deal when you think about
It's like the fast food chain deal.
Well, they also, I think they got rid of the 4 for 4 now because now you got your $5 biggie bag.
Biggie bag. It's a pretty good deal though.
Here's a side tangent. I'm not going to get into it, but audience members, if you want something interesting to do, go look up the current fast food wars on Price. It's very fascinating.
Oh, okay.
I know what you're talking about.
I'm
gonna have to do some research.
Yeah. I'll tell you about it later.
More to discuss
anything more
about
to say
the film?
about yes, Mehmet or Said, because we can also potentially talk a little bit about Omar, the guy who goes to the Kurdish village that's sort of situated on the border. We brought him up a little bit earlier, but I don't want to move on too quickly from the two biggest storylines in the film.
Well, no, I think we've pretty much covered the other two. That one is an interesting one to me because that one was the one I was least clear on. I think Omar as the character is certainly given the least information, personality. We don't even in a lot of the shots of that village, a lot of sequences of that village, they're kind of thrown in between other things. I'm like, oh yeah, that's right, this is still happening. And he's also not in a lot of those shots. It's just a lot about the villagers and the way that the border patrol is interacting with them. But there are still very good harrowing moments there. I think those were the ones I had the hardest time getting emotionally understanding the emotional context of, other than just the atrocity that is going on at the time and the mistreatment and horror that these people are facing. I understood that on a human level, but in a filmic context level, because Omar is the one I think pretty clearly given the least
there's also
information about him.
1 second.
He's got something.
The other guy who goes who ends
Yeah.
up in the city at the brothel, right? And as kind of
Yusuf, I believe.
But his story, I think I understood a little bit clearer.
Sure.
Because we saw more of him interacting with women. That was his story. But I liked those sequences. But I think that in terms of when I felt the most confused of this story's still going on, we hadn't seen this in a while, that was when I just felt most jarred by whenever we returned to it.
I think it's certainly the one, we talked about the sort of context of our viewing, watching this censored version. I think it would make sense.
Yeah.
It makes sense that that was where a lot of the material would be cut out of.
That's probably true. And also that's probably, given that information or that context, that's probably where most of his personality, his conflict, his personal information, we would have seen it there, because I'm sure he has some connection to the Kurdish conflict, this being his home village and a history there and things that we didn't really get to see. He just kind of shows up there, and then there's a couple of scenes of people being shot,
political violence,
In this cut, there's mentions to a family member character who is in hiding, who might reappear to visit Omar, knowing that Omar is on leave, and there's a tension there. And to me, that's knowing now. At the moment, I was like, I feel like we're skipping steps, but knowing now that we watch the censored version, I think that is just emblematic of cutting for a non-narrative
an
reason.
agenda.
If you could imagine
cutting to please the Turkish government and the Turkish jury at the Cannes Film Festival.
If you could imagine that having a character whose basis is I'm a Kurd, I am oppressed by the Turkish state, we are fighting. If you could imagine many different ways that a character with this identity would express themselves in the film, and every single one of them would require the state doing the oppressing to censor and get rid of it. And so then
he is also the one who, in this sort of conversation, when they all really go their separate ways after that initial bus ride, he tells Mehmet that he's like, listen, I'm not coming back.
Yeah.
What happens to him at the end?
Research is being done.
Okay.
I just opened
on the fly Wikipedia.
Stuff your pie hole.
Yeah, so I'm just going to read a short excerpt here from the Wikipedia page. This is about the controversy and the banning of the film. One scene in the movie even calls the location of Omar's village Kurdistan. A new version of Yol was released in 2017 called Yol the Full Version, which many of his controversial parts and scenes have been taken out in order to make the film suitable for release in Turkey.
The full version.
Sure.
In order to be shown at the Turkish stand at the Cannes 2017, the Kurdistan insert was removed. Because there's also use of the Kurdish language, music, and culture, which could not be shown at the time. So there was a lot of explicit stuff like that.
Yeah.
And then they also say later here, quote, the frame showing Kurdistan as well as a highly political scene where Omar speaks about difficulties of being Kurdish were removed.
Yeah.
So that's the stuff we were missing, and that's the stuff that would make that plot line as meaningful as the other ones.
Sure.
If anyone has a way to watch the actual full version of this film, I don't know.
The one that's bigger, longer, and uncut.
Yes.
Exactly.
Can you, again, is there a lot of it left in YouTube comments? Or
we have a Discord.
We have a Discord server. We don't condone illegal activity on the Discord server.
But for
what if it's like restoring
of
politically
education,
censored art?
activism, and artistic, double preservation.
Yeah.
Hit us up if you've got this. If you've
only
got this
through completely legal means and channels, and much like we watch this film.
And what I would say is, if you were to post a leak that was less above the board in our Discord server, only in the time between you posting it and us deleting it would that be sort of valid, right? We would want to delete that with all due haste because we do not support that.
I would never save
for
those
sure.
things
100%.
to my own files. Never do that ever.
Oh, God.
But so refocusing back on Omar and his narrative in the film as it exists in the version that we watched, I think those, like, Goran's sort of vision, doctoral vision, is so strong here that you can't really take all of it out, obviously. I think
no, definitely
those overarching feelings of, like, yearning for freedom are really, at this point in the version that we watched, really only emblemized in those sort of slow-mo sequences of him riding horses with this friend of his that he was going to go see there. I think because that is shown while he's in prison, and then, like, towards the end when he is sort of facing down the prospect of being forced to leave, or whether or not he should leave.
I also think that this section in Kurdistan has the most reverence for, like, the land, the way that the photography is so centered around what this landscape is like, and how honestly, it is shown in a much more beautiful light than the other landscapes of the film, despite the whole film having lots of wondrous landscapes. But here in this Kurdish section, it's like the yearning. I can see our characters yearning for, like, his land and his environment that he knows and is friendly and just wants to be in. And that was totally evinced through filmmaking. Not a lick of dialogue to indicate that otherwise. So it was well done. Hard to do that.
It's also the part of the film that I think does the political fear the best, and certainly focuses on it the most, because we get the scenes of people hiding in their homes, they listen to gunshots. We get the part where they bring back the corpses and they force the people to look at them, and they're like, "Yeah, oops, sorry, this kind of shit happens." Basically,
but do you know these people? Essentially, with the implicit understanding, and these villagers understand this, that, like, if they admit that they know these people, they will be under the eye of the Turkish government. They'll be watched, imprisoned, killed, all of these things. And so they have to deny knowing their friends and family members.
And not only that, but the implication of, or the reason they are doing this in the way that they're doing this is to create fear, is to oppress them even further, to show their power, be like, look what we can make you do. We can make you line up and look at your dead friends and family members. That, I think, contrasts very nicely, Timo, and makes these parts, even with without the context, because of the censoring, emotionally powerful. The contrast between the peaceful land and the peace of this village that we can infer and see a little bit of having pre-coup versus they're basically just, like, hiding in ostensibly bomb shelters the entire time that are, like, their own homes. It's also the part where the architecture is at its most foreign to us as foreigners, because these people are living in homes made of wood and mud on the outside and straw roofs and things, and that certainly makes the oppression and the hiding in these homes, especially to a foreign viewer, even more, like, kind of alien in a way, and like oppressive.
A lot of the cities that we see for the rest of the film have this, brutalist Soviet architecture to them, obviously. So, that it does stand in stark contrast, pointing to what Timo is saying, at, like, this loving representation of the countryside and Kurdistan, or Turkey as it once existed, potentially.
There's also sort of the last large point I'd make, and then I'm pretty much out. Timo, you mentioned earlier an idea of forgiveness in the film, And there's an interesting line you mentioned to Tucker, where the soldiers, when they're having people try to identify the bodies, they say, "We're sorry that we had to do this."
Yeah.
And I think we see different modes of forgiveness, different degrees of forgiveness, and questions about who we can forgive, who deserves that forgiveness, and why throughout the entire film. We see the soldiers asking for it. We see an inability to forgive Mehmet killing, ultimately being what kills him on that train. And then we see Sayid obviously wrestling with, to the end, to this sort of crisis of conscience that you talked about earlier, Tanner, whether he can indeed forgive his wife. And so I don't think the film really has a thesis on who should be forgiven, but I think that it's also sort of the point.
Yeah.
And I found that to be an interesting idea to reflect on in all the different storylines.
Yeah, they would have used one character if they wanted us to read one thesis about it. And so the fact of having many different characters gets to show us the many different outcomes of this, as pretty much every society is, like a complex place where many different currents and influences are all forcing on each other all the time.
Definitely. And the final point that I lost my train of thought.
Oh, okay.
Like literally, like I was prepping it, and then you said something. And
I grabbed it.
The final
what's
point,
it?
I got it right here.
What is it?
I don't want to tell you.
Oh, that's too bad.
Did we have anything to say about Yusuf, this guy who, like, basically is trying to set up...
I got it. I
okay,
grabbed it. I grabbed it. Oh, I found it in your pocket. Oh, look at that. Wiggle. I think an interesting point about forgiveness and identity in this film that I think makes the group of characters that we're following even more interesting to me is for many of them not going into their their violent history of what got them into prison, what conflicts got them imprisoned, because I think that leaving that by the wayside, of course, we do learn why Mehmet is in prison. And we do know why, though, as we see, for a reason that is more emotionally complex and morally gray than the short guy who just killed someone.
Yeah, he's like,
that is such a funny
honestly,
scene. That is
kind of
really
a funny scene where he's like,
that is the funniest film in the movie.
They make me look like a killer. He's like, didn't you shoot a guy? He's like, well, yeah.
It's like, just make me look like a killer. Yeah, but I think it's a smart directorial decision to endear us more to the characters, not knowing what they did to get them into prison, because that would then create a sort of mental context of like, oh, but this guy is capable of this. You don't know what they did. It could have been anything from a crime that to us we might see them in a more negative light if we learned about it, or it might be something of, oh, they left their papers at home and they got taken to prison because of that.
Well, I'm sure they're all filthy communists and are locked up for just reasons.
No, but I think that avoiding that allows for there to be a level of disconnect from the reality that allows you to empathize even more with the characters. And I thought that was a very smart decision, because in any given more, frankly, American film, you would learn, here's the backstory, here's why they're in prison, here's why that impacts their personality in this way. But I think that we're just left to view them as they are in this moment, rather than letting their history impact our knowledge of them emotionally. And I think that's a smart emotional decision for this film.
Yeah.
Short, slide it in here.
Short guy.
I think the score is great. I think
it is.
2 is a great year for movie scores.
Yeah,
it is. Very
It's
unique.
got that-
Didn't expect that, like...
So synth and
listen, kind of like Vangelis almost.
It's the 80s, you know.
I mean,
you
that's what I was
gotta
gonna
have the
argue.
synth score.
I was like, this is a very 80s score, and it works in this. Yeah.
Oh, the final thing I want to say about the filmmaking is this film, made on the cameras in the time that it was, is very, film stock wise and color grading wise is very different from the films that we're used to seeing from the 80s, which are much crisper, Hollywood, high production value, best cameras you can buy. That's obviously not the case with this, and the film has been restored. It looks good, but it definitely is grainier and a little bit softer and has a different texture to it.
Yeah, it's made in like the Eastern context of filmmaking as opposed to like the Western sort of context of filmmaking.
But I appreciated that.
Yeah. I thought you hated it.
No, I didn't.
Oh, interesting.
That's I'll have to think about that a little bit more.
That's
Does
interesting.
the audience appreciate our Morbius cut?
The Cuppius.
The Cuppius, yeah.
A film of equal political import, Morbius.
Okay, let's give this a score. See where it ends up on the list. And since we did do the the Palm details for this year last time, why don't you just
We did, yes.
remind, maybe hit a highlight or two?
Let's find. Okay, hang on. The Palm details from last time, they were from the year 1982, of course. And
weren't they just?
If we all recall, I'll just go over a couple of the people. Sidney Lumet, we actually did get we got pronunciation checked on him.
I was gonna pronunciation check you, but we were
moving quick. It's all right. And Geraldine Chaplin were a couple of the notable jury members who voted for both this and Missing in 1982. So
I was gonna check your pronunciation, but I didn't know you were wrong.
Oh. I know you. I see that, and I'm like, oh, like French, Lumet. But
I would have done the same.
Yeah.
Also not French.
Also not French, American guy.
Yeah.
And I would have done the same.
All right.
I think
Ready?
he would have done the same, folks.
Abram.
Hang on, let me get ready.
Oh, fuck.
I'm waiting
forgot
on
to score
Abram.
this
Now I gotta-
We score these movies? Oh, this is new.
Wait.
This is his first time doing
I
this.
forgot what show we're
Abram's
doing.
sitting there with a great grin
We
on
do
his
this on all our
face.
shows.
Why is my phone not on the Wi-Fi? Hold on. No, that's not
brother.
consequential at the exact
Comes
moment.
to the episode where we have a hard out, and now look what's happening. It's all going to shit.
I've got my
know?
number in. I have my number
Okay,
in.
hang on, let me go number in.
1, go!
I was first in. Look
Yeah,
at
you
that.
were. Oh, wow,
job.
we're really aligned. There is no tie.
tightly
The
packed.
score number is 8.4. It's gonna break the ties, shoot through that four-way.
Your
Yeah.
agenda.
The wall of the 8.2s that we had to litigate last week
Yeah,
Has been broken.
has been broken by.
And
True.
and as such, it will be going below Taxi Driver, above Uncle Boonmee, who recalls his past lives. He controls his past lives. I'm going to change that title every time I read it.
I mean, perhaps our past lives are in control of us.
Whoa.
Wow. That's what Past Lives is about.
Yeah.
Wow.
Spot
Also movie
number
reviewed.
5. Spot number 5.
Spot number
Wow,
5.
that's really high.
It is.
It is really high. This is a powerful film. One, I just, you know what? Similar in kind of oeuvre to Taste of Cherry. Not to, I guess,
Sure.
but Middle Eastern-ish and still very prescient and got a lot to say.
Sure, if you say so. Pop.
Let's spin the wheel.
spin the wheel.
Spin the wheel. Okay.
Spin that wheel. Spin that wheel. Spin that wheel. I was thinking, man, I introducing a new song.
New song?
Yeah.
We could never. We could never.
That's a copyrighted tune.
That's true.
Is it? No, isn't he dead?
Yeah, it's in the
Who-
public
who is
domain.
he?
Mozart or whatever?
That's a fair
Beethoven?
point.
They all kicked
I
it.
think they might be dead.
They all-
I need
Okay.
to double check.
We're
okay.
just saying in 3, 2, 1.
Wheel, what's your deal? Give us a movie that makes us squeal. Is it on digital or is it on real? Wheel, what's your deal?
And Wheel's deal is number 59.
And number 59.
Oh, scroll up.
Oh,
there it is.
Oh, I want to watch
Number
this movie.
59 gives us a movie from our best buddy.
Nope.
Nope. Nope.
Just want to preface that. Hey, I would say not even a funny bit.
This is the 2002 Palme d'Or winner, starring Adrian Brody and directed by Roman Polanski. We will be watching The Pianist.
The Pianist. Oh, okay. Well, I don't think I've seen any Polanski films.
Very famous movie amongst
Chinatown?
Yeah.
Oh, I guess I've seen Chinatown. Yeah, that's the only.
Oh, yeah.
That's the only one.
Rosemary's Baby.
No, he doesn't watch movies.
Nah.
Amongst the most popular films on Letterboxd that I have
Oh.
never seen.
Yeah,
Mhm.
and I assume there's a piano somewhere in there.
Piano
I'm
on
sorry, in the movie The
the
Pianist.
cover.
I'm just.
I mean, it's on the poster.
spitballing
Look, it's right there.
I just see a lot of luggage on this banner there.
Uh-huh.
This is the true story of pianist Vladislav Spielman. Vladislav Spielman experiencing in what? Okay, this doesn't. His experiences in Warsaw during the Nazi occupation. When the Jews of the city find themselves forced into a ghetto, Spielman finds work playing in a cafe. And when his family is deported in 1942, he stays behind, works as a while as a laborer, and then eventually goes into hiding in the ruins of a war-torn city.
Okay. World War.
Back to World War II, baby.
This is World War II. This is a more modern take on it, of course. I believe Adrian Brody still holds the record for youngest Best Actor winner for this film.
Really?
And also will be echoed by a film that he has potentially releasing this year or next year. That is also a sort of period drama where he is a Jewish man fleeing the Nazi occupation in Europe.
Getting typecast.
Yeah. Well,
Okay.
Let's do it.
The Pianist.
The Pianist. Let's talk about it next week. Stay tuned here on Backlot Banter for more movie content. Write your thoughts on this film or other films down in the comments. We'll talk about whatever you write. So, as I say, stay cool, keep warm. Peace.